Hi folks, welcome to Career Prep Part 2 Senior Seminar with our Thrive-Grad programs in the AEC. Today we have folks from the Career Center who are going to be talking about our career preparation pieces. You did not need to attend the Career Prep Part 1 before attending this, but a lot of those pieces do connect. And I'm going to pass it over to Matt again and talk a little bit more about what to expect from this presentation.
Hi y'all, my name is Madigan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a career education coordinator at CSU's Career Center. I also have a colleague here with me, Jose. Jose, do you want to introduce yourself really quick?
Hey y'all, my name is Jose Arce. I'm also career education coordinator at the Career Center, and I welcome any and all pronouns. It's nice to meet y'all.
Awesome. So this is called Career Prep Part 2, just because this is focused on, like if you went to the session earlier this semester, it was focused kind of on like resumes and cover letters and setting up LinkedIn profiles and that kind of stuff. Where we're going to focus more on actually doing the job searching, what to do, interviewing, and then once you get that job offer. So just kind of focus a little bit further down for those who might be a little bit closer to looking at that process. So that's why it's called Part 2. Like Deanna said, like you didn't have to be at Part 1. This is just a little bit of different topics than previously. So we have a, let me see if we can go. Quickly, just wanted to go over CSU's principles of community, just because career can be personal. We are going to talk about identity a little bit today. And so just wanting to remind folks to be respectful of other people's stories and know that we may all be coming from different places and have had messaging about career that may have been different. And so as folks are wanting to share out today, I'm just asking that we be respectful of that. And then in the next hour, which is actually an hour and 15, but may end up being shorter, we are going to talk about job searching, interviewing, knowing some of your rights in the interview process and on the job, navigating identity throughout the job search process, and then finally negotiating offers. So I'm going to start out with some job searching. We do have a pretty ambitious agenda for the amount of time that we have, so I'm going to dive right in. And if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me, put it in the chat, whatever, and we can always pause. Okay, so if y'all wouldn't mind, you can share out loud or put in the chat, thinking about previous jobs that you've had. And if you haven't, that's okay too, just thinking about maybe friends, other folks in high school, college, even before. How did you know about them? How did you get them? Where did you find them? What kind of has your experience with job searching maybe already been? Yeah, go ahead.
That's a really good question. Now that I'm thinking about it, I realized that most of the jobs that I've had is from knowing somebody in that job already. And so, yeah, just I guess like having that connection with people is how I've gotten most of my jobs.
Yeah. And that's not an unusual experience, that when thinking back to like previous jobs, even right jobs that we may have had when we were younger, a lot of times it is because we were connected with someone and they kind of said, hey, we have this opportunity, or maybe we can connect you with someone else. And so we're going to talk about the role that networking, which is really just a fancy way of saying, being connected with folks and knowing folks can really impact the job search process. Thanks for sharing. So one big takeaway that I want you all to take from just kind of how to approach the job search in general is that there are many different angles you can approach this from. I think when we think of job searching, I know my mind immediately goes to finding, job opportunities online, sending in our resume, just like me behind the computer, that being job searching. That can be an isolating process. That can be a lonely process. It can be discouraging, especially if you're not hearing back from folks and you're like, I feel like I'm sending stuff out into the void. I don't know what's happening to it. And so that's not the only method of job searching. And Roman, like you said, knowing people has maybe been how we've found positions in the past. And that's also going to be a way to find positions in the future. So we can do some intentional networking. So looking on here, we have online job listings. So Handshake, Google, LinkedIn. If you all don't have a Handshake account set up yet, I would highly encourage doing that. That's where all of the folks who want to specifically recruit CSU students we'll be posting their internships and jobs, that kind of thing. So absolutely keep applying online. Don't ditch that strategy entirely. But in addition to that, doing some networking and informational interviews with folks maybe at companies that you're interested in, going to events, right? There's a lot of online events happening right now because employers have discovered that it's actually easier for them to host events when they don't have to have a space. They can just do it online. So there's some of those opportunities that even weren't there pre-COVID. Then informational interview is really just asking someone to share some information about their career path and what their experience has been like. And folks are really, really open to doing that generally. I'll often ask students, if someone in high school reached out to you and said, hey, I'm really interested, in CSU and maybe your particular major, would you be willing to tell me about your experience with it? Would you be willing to talk to that high school student? And I can see you shaking your head or nodding your head. Yeah, like a lot of people say, yeah, of course I would. And yet we are kind of hesitant to reach out to folks to help us. But folks are really generally willing to do that and excited to do that. Career fairs and employer events. So we put on a career fair every semester. Also in spring, we have a just-in-time fair, which is a little bit closer to the end of the semester. That's when employers come because they want to recruit CSU students. So it's a great opportunity to meet potential employers. You can also meet folks through professional associations and conferences. And I can show you on our resource page where to find those professional associations and conferences, or you can just search for them on the web. And then connecting directly with companies in your field that you want to work for. So rather than searching by job title, you might search by company first and see if you can find any folks that work there and be a little bit targeted in that approach. So we do not have to just send materials into the void. There are lots of ways that we can approach this. And I think the more strategies you're using at once, the more you're kind of upping your chances. Okay, so next thing would be to make a job search plan. So if you are anything like me or I was in college, the idea of the job search is so overwhelming that I either put it off and do everything I can think of to do before it, like cleaning, everything I don't want to do. I'm like, job searching is the last thing, last priority, or try to do it in one Saturday from sunup to sundown and get really overwhelmed. I don't recommend either of those strategies. I think breaking up any goal into smaller components can be really helpful. And we learn that just through schoolwork and that types of thing. So try to approach your job search in the same way. Make a plan for yourself moving forward. Use that calendar. If you already track maybe assignments or courses on a calendar, see if you can schedule some job search time. How early do you want to start looking based on maybe when you need to have something set? So if you're like, I have a little bit of time after graduation, I can chill, maybe I want a little bit of a break versus I need to have something right after graduation because I have bills I got to pay right away. So depending on what your individual situation is, kind of do some backtracking and think about when you might want to start the job search process or start looking. How frequently will you dedicate time? So will this look like 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week, 2 hours every other week? What feels reasonable for you? And then of the strategies we talked about, which seem like they would be most useful for you. If you are really a naturally social person, you like connecting, maybe really leaning into that networking and connecting is going to be something that you want to spend even more than half of the time on. And if that's not your favorite thing to do, maybe you want to spend a little bit more time on the online applications in that part. And do estimate multiple months. The average job search for full-time work, folks taking jobs that they really are excited about and want to be in, takes about 4 to 6 months on average. So when doing that backtracking, just keep that approximate timeline in mind. Before I move on, just wanted to see if, Jose, you had anything else you wanted to add about job searching, or if folks had any questions so far.
The only thing I would say is give yourself patience and grace throughout that job searching plan, especially with COVID. It's job search is not easy. And then now you have this global pandemic and you're doing everything already virtually, and it can feel overwhelming that you feel like I have to go to every networking event because it's virtual now. And it's go at your own pace. And I think giving yourself grace helps you with that. But then on the other end, making sure you have someone to help keep you accountable, because then too much grace and then you haven't submitted any resumes.
That was me, a little bit too much grace for myself. Okay, so thinking about how do companies hire, this is kind of how we hope or wished that companies would hire. Oh, my font's a little off there, but that we could just maybe submit our resume to the web and someone would find it and reach out to us and say, hey, your skills match great. Maybe then we'll look at online postings, then consider working with recruiters, then maybe networking, and finally inside the company. This is how, sorry again that these fonts are a little bit off. This is how employers prefer to hire. So first from inside the company, then through networking, then maybe through recruiters, online postings, and finally going out and looking for resumes. So what do you notice about the job seeker's ideal and the employer's ideal?
To me, I see that networking is kind of up higher in the employer's ideal than the seeker's ideal, and how the resume is at the way bottom. Honestly, not what I expected, but it's really interesting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are actually in the opposite order of each other. So the way that so like you said, right, networking is pretty high on the employer's ideal, pretty low on the job seeker's ideal. So the way that we wish that employers hired is actually exactly opposite from how they prefer to hire. We call this the open market versus the hidden market. So the open market is those jobs that are posted online, they're truly available. And the hidden market is those jobs that may not even be posted because employers already have somebody in mind that they want to hire, or they might be posted, but for like legal reasons. And yet they also still have somebody in mind that they want to hire. And so as folks are applying, they're not actually getting a fair chance at that opportunity. The reason that employers prefer to hire through inside the company and networking is that they are very risk averse. And it's expensive to hire someone and have to either fire, rehire, retrain. That is an expensive process. And so they want to make sure that the first person that they hire is going to be really great at the job. And we tend to be more comfortable with people that we've already worked with or already know. That being said, this is a super inequitable way of hiring. Because people tend to know and associate with people who share identities with them, this leads to folks who are already empowered just persisting those same identities and in power and opportunities over time. So I want us to understand why networking is a common practice. It can be accounted for about 70 to 85% of jobs, and realize that networking is not a fair practice of hiring. So when positions are posted online and they already have someone in mind that they want to hire, it's not actually fair that we're letting folks apply for a job when they maybe don't have a chance to begin with, and continuing to give opportunities to those folks that we already know. So I want us to kind of understand both of those things. Okay, so I know this meme is kind of old, but I just thought it was funny. I actually made this meme myself, thank you. Got to throw a little humor in the middle. Okay, so networking, huge, meeting people, huge, incorporate it as much as you can, just based on the stats at this point. And I think we can problematize it along the way as well. Some last minute tips and tricks for your job search. A lot of this is from mistakes that I have made. Save the job description. They might pull it from online. And I have been to an interview for a job that I no longer had access to the job description. And they asked me what I was most excited about in the job description, and I didn't remember what the job was because I was applying to like 20, 30 positions at the time. It was very awkward. I did not get the job. I don't recommend that as a strategy. I'm a great example of what not to do in the job search. So I'm happy to share all of my stories. But save the job description in like a Word document, and also just try to keep your search organized in some way, maybe having like folders for different positions where you keep your resume that's specific to that job, the job description for that job. That really helped me a lot. Tailor your resume to every single job you apply to. This is something that I think we just aren't told or don't know, because we expect that when we make our resume, right, we finished our resume, it's completed. But employers really do notice when the resume is specifically tailored to that job. And some employers, depending on how big they are, will send resumes through scanning software where they're looking for specific keywords, and they're gonna be scanning resumes in or out based on whether those keywords are on the resume or not. So what I do is print the job description or just in some way set myself up to be able to highlight it. What are they really emphasizing in the job description? And then how can I highlight those things on my resume? because they might be scanning it through software. And even if they're not, they're still looking for those keywords. It's not to say you have to start the whole thing from scratch. Maybe you just change a qualification section at the top, or change maybe the order of experiences so that the ones that are most relevant are nearest the top. Google yourself, because 80% of employers will. There is no rules about what you can't have available online. It's totally up to you what you're comfortable with employers seeing. Just do a quick Google, make sure that you are comfortable with everything that comes up. Also, depending on like how common your name is. I know for me, when I search Madigan Turnquist, I am the only person that comes up online. I have not met anyone with my name. But just knowing what employers have access to can give us a little bit of peace of mind. Jose talked about this a little bit, but conserve your energy and pace yourself. It is exhausting applying for jobs. It is so tiring. It can be a full-time job in itself. The fact that people do it while they're in school is astounding. And sometimes we have to. So pace yourself, conserve your energy, and know, and maybe you put energy more toward the positions that you feel really excited about. And then there's a couple that you're like, I'm just going to throw the same resume at a few of these because I can't tailor my resume every single time. And then lastly, never undersell or undervalue your skill set. You have so much value to bring to the workforce. The workforce needs young, bright minds with diverse ideas, perspectives. Sometimes on resumes, I feel like we'll say like, oh, I did that thing, but everybody did that, right? Or everybody has this skill. And I'm telling you, not everybody has your skills and experiences and the things that you have to bring to the workplace. And being able to feel confident in that yourself is really important to be able to translate that to an interviewer or an employer. So if you're feeling like, I'm not sure what my skill sets are, I'm not sure what unique value I bring, like come chat with the Career Center and we'll talk through it, because I promise you that you have unique skills to bring to the workforce. Okay, so that's job searching. How are we feeling? Thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs middle. Okay, thumbs up. So we're gonna dive into interviewing now. How to land the job. So once we've submitted those materials, we get a call, they say, we'd love to interview you. Another little meme. So this says when you're on an interview for a job you really want and you just start lying. And this little girl says, I've been doing pageants for 16 years, I think. So we don't recommend lying in interviews. And interviewing is kind of like finessing our experiences to be able to talk about them in the most positive light possible. So for folks who have previously interviewed, what did you learn from the experience? What was important? Maybe what was just the interview experience like?
Interviews are always scary. They're very, at least for me, I've always been intimidated to go to interviews just because I feel like I'm gonna be like saying the wrong things. But yeah, just like you said, I think it's a nice time to like say good things about yourself and just like amp yourself up and for the job. And I think it's important to just be confident, whether what you feel like what you're saying is not the right thing. I just maintaining that confidence throughout the interview is very important. And I don't know, I think one thing I've also learned throughout my time doing interviews is like vocab. I feel like certain vocab can help you like stick out in interviews and help you be remembered.
Yeah, absolutely. So like those keywords we were kind of talking about earlier. Yeah, also you're right, interviewing is scary. It's always scary. I talk about interviewing all the time. I teach about it and I'm still terrified when I'm in an interview. So Deanna, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I feel like something that I learned a lot when I was applying for this position at the AC is that I always hated when people offered to do mock interviews with me because I was always so embarrassed and felt like I just felt like I was like super insecure, and I was like, the people who know me are gonna like I would rather go with a stranger and do that. But I think the people who really knew me, like my supervisors at that time or people that I worked with in previous roles, gave me like really genuine feedback, and I was really like underselling myself and not talking about things that they knew about me that I think they helped me really like understand, and that was really helpful, but it was something that I think I didn't do until like really later on after so many different interviews and positions. So I think that that is something that is scary, but really great to try to do while you're getting ready to interview.
Yeah, I think it's such a good point too, that the people that we know and that maybe we've worked with already can be really good hype people. So if you're not feeling super confident, just asking your friends, asking your mentors, like, can you help me like remember what I'm great at? Like they will hype you up, like rely on those hype people if you feel like you're struggling to hype yourself up. So the purpose of interviewing, I would normally ask this, but I'll just keep going for the sake of time. Often we think is to get the job, right? To convince the employer that we're qualified. And that is part of interviewing. But the other aspect or purpose of interviewing is to find out if we want the job. Is this a place where we feel like we can really thrive, where we're going to be welcomed, where we're going to be able to be our full authentic self? And the interview is a really good place for you to ask those questions before you sign on to something that maybe isn't going to be a good environment for you or isn't going to be the position that you thought it was. So interviewing is a two-way conversation. It's for the employer to get to know you and your strengths, and it's also for you to get to know the employer and what they have to offer you. They want, like employers need employees, and sometimes I think that we feel like we're in this position that's desperate, but they need us to be successful. And so we have a little bit of power in the interviewing process, and that can depend right on how much and how soon we need the job, where we might feel like I have to just say whatever I need to say to get this job, or I can do a little bit more of what I call like sussing out. Is this going to be a place where I'm going to be able to thrive? So in prepping for an interview, I really have like 4 main strategies, all of which I think can be collected on what I would call my Hype Me Up document, my interviewing study guide, whatever you want to call it, where you just think of what do I think is going to be the content of this interview, right? Similar to thinking of a test. What content do I think is going to be on this test? How can I prepare for it ahead of time? So anticipate those questions. You can use the job description to think about it, look for patterns and themes. You can also use sites like Handshake and Glassdoor, where people that have previously interviewed will actually say what the interview questions were. Similarly, reflect on your experiences. So if they ask you, can you tell us about a time when this happened? Be thinking about some of the times ahead of the interview where you really shined, where you did a really great job, where you maybe succeeded through some kind of barrier or challenge, because they're going to ask you about those. And even if they don't ask you about them directly, it's great to have those examples prepared ahead of time. Also want to do your research on the company itself. I always say that you can, depending on your level of comfort, you can kind of answer questions on the spot. The one that's really hard to answer if you haven't done research ahead of time is, what do you know about our company? That one's very hard to make up if you haven't done the research ahead of time. So just be familiar with like the company or organization, their values, their mission. And then very likely they will ask you at the end of the interview what questions you have for them. So just have those questions ready beforehand. The only wrong answer is no, I don't, because it shows that you are invested, you want to know more. And like we said, it is a two-way conversation. So this is your chance to get to ask them some of those questions of, how am I going to be supported in this role? What does supervision look like? Those types of things. And then lastly, I really encourage mock interviewing. It really makes a big difference. You can do it with the Career Center. And if you're not comfortable, you can always do it with a family or friend, or just record yourself if you want it to be. That can be a vulnerable activity to watch yourself on recording. I know I don't even like the sound of my own voice, but it can teach you a lot when you sort of watch yourself back. So Hype Me Up document, that's the theme of this slide, is collect your information and hype yourself up. So this is just a screenshot of what Glassdoor looks like. If you wanted to work at National Geographic, for example, you can click on this interviews link and people will tell you what interview questions they have had at National Geographic. Same thing can be accessed on Handshake, but just by searching a specific employer and looking at interviews. Okay, so interviewing best practices. I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can, maybe not talk about all of these, but just some big themes I want to point out here. You can sort of look at these on your own. Is that I think the probably biggest mistake that people make in interviewing is being way too vague in their responses. So that's why it's so important that beforehand you think through those examples, those times where you were really awesome. Because if they ask you, can you give an example of a time where you worked with a group to achieve a common goal? And your answer is somewhere around, well, it was a group project in college and we were, working on this project together, and there were some challenges that came up along the way. And, we really just had to pull together and come through and present this final product. Like, I'm not sure what's going on at all, right? Like, I need more context, a story, I need a little bit of details to at least be able to follow. And because I also think it makes it more, it makes it clear that it's not something that you're just coming up with on the spot, or that you're like, we've all been in a situation where we've kind of had to like fumble through an answer. But I think being vague is a mistake that a lot of people make because they haven't thought through beforehand some of the specifics of the stories that they want to share. Providing examples is great. They will ask for examples, but even if they don't, if you can say, here's some skill sets that I have, and here's some examples of when I use them, that just makes your answer even stronger and more believable, right? Anyone can say that they have a skill, but can you show that you have that skill through some specific examples? We already talked about being confident. Don't need to overthink the amount of time you're spending. I would just say be conscious of time throughout the interview. If you only have 20 minutes, you might have to talk or get through questions a little bit faster. But I would say a lot of people undershare because they're not being specific enough, or they could usually follow up a little bit more on their answers. Be yourself, send a thank you afterward. If you don't remember all of this, you'll have access to this presentation, and you can check in with the Career Center at any time. You don't have to remember all this content right now. That's what we're here for. But sending a thank you can make a big difference. Asking questions of them, which we talked about. And then, oh, bye, Roman. Sorry, I didn't see your chat. And then answer what they're really asking. And by this, I really just mean don't give up on a question. If they say, can you tell us about a time that you were in conflict with a coworker? And you can't think of an example of this. Don't just say, sorry, no, I can't think of anything. Think about, what are they wanting to know about this answer, or about this question? They're probably wanting to know, how do you handle conflict at work? So if you have an example of a conflict with a supervisor that you can provide instead, right? Say, I don't have an example of that, but I do have an example of conflict elsewhere, and then spend majority of the answer on how you handled the conflict, not the conflict itself, because that's what they're really asking in that question. Okay, tell me about yourself. This is just a common question, I think, that happens at the beginning of a lot of interviews. So it's a good one to practice answering, especially because it seems like it would be really easy for us to do. And I know if someone's like, tell me about yourself, I'm like, I don't remember anything. I don't know anything about myself. So just expect that this question is coming, or question, it's more of a statement. Other common questions you might expect to see, asking about biggest strength, biggest weakness, future career goals, what's unique about you, or how others might describe you. So these are just kind of questions you can prep for generally as you're making your Hype Me Up document. And then behavioral questions are those questions about, tell me about a specific time when, which is why it's important to reflect on our experiences before going into interviews. Okay. STAR method, or the STAR-L method, is really just a method for answering those behavioral questions. And really, this is just storytelling, right? So you're giving the situation first, the specific task that you were working on, the action that you took, so not the action that somebody else took or you all as a group took, but what you individually did, the result, and maybe some lessons learned. But really, I would just sum this up as, if when asked about specific examples, just tell a story, right? Give them enough context that it makes sense, and give them the ending and kind of the resolution as well. Okay, we are not going to practice. We just don't have enough folks to practice. But if you want to take a screenshot of this, here's 3 examples of behavioral questions that you could practice. Okay, let me see if this is my last interviewing. Yeah, so like I talked about, just remember that interviewers are people, interviews are conversations. It's a really intimidating and uncomfortable process. Like I said, even if you've interviewed a lot, or if talking about interviewing is your job, it's still uncomfortable. And it helps me to remember that at the end of the day, who's ever interviewing me, they also get in their pajamas and watch Netflix and all that kind of stuff. And those interviews really are two-way for us to learn about them as well. Here's just an interviewing resource we have at the Career Center. It's called Big Interview. So if you go into our resource center and search for it, I talked about like you can record yourself answering questions. This will actually prompt questions for you. You can practice interviewing on this platform if you want to do this before doing like a live mock interview. Okay. Jose and Deanna, do you have anything you want to add to just interviewing in general?
I would say just all of those pieces of advice are really great, and like pace yourself in that experience as well, because a lot of times you'll get a couple of days beforehand, and so don't feel like you have to prep all the night before, because for some folks that can feel really overwhelming. You might not be able to think your best, and so like maybe first day you're doing research on the company, the next day you're doing a mock interview, the day after that you're doing your hype up sheet. And those are all things I've done in my personal like job searches and interview preparation, and knowing, doing what feels right, because you're going to get a lot of advice. So pick and choose the areas you maybe want to focus on. Like maybe you feel great answering questions, but you don't feel like you do enough research, and making sure you spend more time doing that. So, but pacing yourself, because it can feel overwhelming, just like the job search part can feel overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say if you know, there's a lot, I've even given a lot of information here about things that you can do or focus on, and know that like, you don't want to get so caught up with like all of it that it just makes you more anxious for the interview. So I would say, yeah, like, don't think so hard about how many times you say, I say, all the time. I just said it again, that it is interfering with your ability to answer the questions, right? So you can be really nitpicky. We are so good at being critical of ourselves, and just focus on the things that are really most important, which is going to be like that content and that confidence. Okay, so knowing your rights before and on the job. So just want to share a couple of things with you also, that you know what some of your rights are and how to navigate those. So in the interviewing process, there are inappropriate questions and illegal interview questions that cannot be asked. Basically, anything that has to do with your identity is an illegal interview question. A lot of times these types of questions are asked casually, right? Like, oh, where are you from? Or, oh, do you have any kids? Or things that might just be like seen as part of conversation. But when you're in the interviewing process, those types of questions are actually not allowed to be asked because of the way that they could influence decision making. So, for example, are you a US citizen is an illegal interview question, but are you authorized to work in the United States is actually legal because it might be required of the position. Do you have any physical disabilities? Would generally be an illegal interview question, but are you able to lift 50 pounds if that is required for the work, would be illegal. So it's kind of, you have to be careful here because I think there's some like fine lines, but if it's a direct question about an identity that you hold versus something that is required of the job or a qualification for the job, that's how you know if it's kind of allowed to be asked or not. If you get asked an illegal question in an interview, you have a couple of options. One, you could deflect and just pretend you didn't hear it, answer something else. You could call it out directly. This can feel really awkward, but saying something like, oh, I'm not sure you're allowed to ask me that, just to cue the person in to like, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot I was just not thinking. You could ask a clarifying question. For example, if someone were to ask you, oh, do you have any children? You could say, oh, why do you ask? And just kind of inquiring further, which might again cue them into the fact that they're not really supposed to be asking that. Or you can always answer the question if you're comfortable doing so. Sometimes that can feel like the best option, especially if you are thinking that it is a really kind of like accidental thing. So like for the children question, again, you could say something like, oh yeah, I have 2 kids, but they're at school and daycare, so it doesn't impact my ability to do this job. So just a couple of options, knowing that this may happen and does happen often accidentally during the interview process. Some of your employee rights once you're on the job, and you can check in with the Career Center about these as well. But just wanting you to know that you have rights in the workplace, including the right to fair wages, to overtime pay, if you're working more than 40 hours and you're a non-exempt employee, freedom from harassment and discrimination, the right to decent and safe working conditions, wage equality for similar work, and the right to file a complaint or lawsuit without any retaliation. So I know, again, this is a lot to remember, but I just want the takeaway here to be like, if something feels icky at work, or you're like, I'm not sure that this is supposed to be happening, it's very possible that it's not supposed to be happening. So check in with your supervisor, check in with HR, and just say, this is happening at work. Something makes me feel like it's not supposed to be happening. Can I check and make sure? Like, can we just check in about this? So if you feel like your rights are being violated, you can always contact HR department. There are also some national organizations that oversee employee rights, such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And I would say one way to just try to protect yourself in the job search as much as possible is to really look at that employment contract before you sign it. We might read like Apple terms and conditions and be like, oh yeah, I read it. Like, we're all lying when we say that, right? It's so long. Your employment contract is worth reading. It is one of the terms and conditions that I would read thoroughly before you sign, because you are agreeing to those things and you don't want to be accidentally signing away any of those rights that you're not comfortable signing away. So look at your employee classification, see if you're an employee or independent contractor. Employees do have a little bit more legal protection. Exempt versus non-exempt is going to affect whether you are entitled to overtime compensation, and then read the fine print in that contract as well. Okay. Pause there for a minute. Any questions, additions? Okay. So just talking about navigating identity throughout the job search in general, and I also talked about like sussing out employers, because I think that we all want to work for workplaces that really value us, and where we can be our full authentic selves. And so how can we navigate what's important to us, and also make sure that our employers are going to be folks that can support us well. So I'm going to ask this question. I know we're a small group today, but how might your identity or identities be a strength in the job search process? So just focusing on that first question, and maybe Jose or Deanna, one of you can share as well.
Something that I've really leaned into is finding community like support spaces. So I've worked in higher education. There's a lot of like Latinx associations for people who work in higher education. So I've used that in my job search and connecting with other folks, and they've been able to share their experiences or share opportunities, as well as give me a better landscape of like specific areas. So moving around. And they will share things like, oh, here's like a Spanish grocery store where you can get like certain foods that you could get back home and things like that, which people don't always think of like in a job search, like your life outside of your job. But I found that to be super, super helpful, and connected with other folks in similar identities. I'm not sure if that answered that like correctly.
Yeah, I was also like not sure if the example that I was thinking of is in connection to this, but I like to connect with folks who share similar identities, who are maybe not directly in the office, but like maybe in another role that is connected to the office. Just kind of share a little bit about like how folks with similar identities feel supported, or like similar like community support groups that are tied to my identity that are important for my role. So also don't know if that answered the question, but yeah, that's something that I have done.
Yeah, that's great. And I think both of you talked about like kind of finding community support systems at work, and Jose, you talked about even like before work, like almost finding access to information and sharing opportunities and that type of thing through maybe identity-based groups. So absolutely. And also just say like, you know, skills that might be associated with your identity, for example, like speaking another language or being from another country, can provide such a unique skill set that a lot of folks don't have going into the workplace. I just saw something this morning that was like looking for Spanish speaking therapists, and there's a shortage, like they're not finding enough folks who can speak Spanish and be therapists, and there's a huge demand and need for that. And just knowing that there's so much research on how diverse workplaces are more successful in all of the myriad of ways that places can be successful, financially, in retention, in joy at work, in attaining a bigger clientele, creating trust, all that things. And so workplaces thrive when those workplaces are diverse. That's just like facts. That's the research is there to prove it. I can like come up with a list of all of that if folks are interested in looking into that deeper, but there's so much value. And just want to note that bias shows up in the job search process as well. People have implicit bias. And so that can also feel like a challenge. Okay. Big takeaway is it's up to you what you want to share with an employer and when. So you are not under any obligation to share any aspects of your identity that you're not comfortable with at any stage in the process at all. There might be areas where you feel like it's hard to avoid. For example, even our names can share information about us. And so, or student organizations that we might be a part of that are identity affiliated. And so if you are wanting to avoid bias at all costs or are worried about employers knowing that information about you, come talk to us about ways that you can kind of reword things on your resume, right? You can put your first initial instead of your first name, whatever makes you feel most comfortable. And you're also welcome to share everything about yourself right up front and say, if an employer isn't going to accept this, I don't want to work for them anyway. So it really has to do with what you are comfortable sharing and when. In terms of finding inclusive employers, there are some strategies here, and I would say that during that interview phase is a really good time to ask some of those hard questions. But you can look at their social media, see what the representation at the company looks like, right? What do they stand for? When national events are happening, are they sharing out about their perspectives on that? Are they creating, initiatives and funds? And the equality index is kind of just a third-party rating system of how inclusive employers have been over time. Look for a non-discrimination policy, or better yet, a commitment to diversity and inclusion. So non-discrimination policy can be just like a legal minimum. So do they have something beyond a non-discrimination policy that's really like, we are committed to this in our company? That's becoming more and more common. That alone doesn't mean that it's necessarily happening, but seeing that that intention is there can be a sign. Meet them at a diversity-focused event. CSU puts on a lot of like identity-based employer events. We have something called Diversity Connect most semesters or most years, where this is employers who are really making an effort to become more diverse and equitable workplaces. It doesn't mean, again, that it's perfect, but they're making the effort. And so finding those employers might be a better place to start. Ask intentional questions in your interview and talk to people who already work there. So if you can find someone at that company, maybe somebody who shares an identity with you, and that's not always possible given the field, right? But see what their experience has been like. This employer says that they're inclusive. How has it felt for you? Have you felt like you can be your full authentic self at work? And just getting that experience from someone who's already kind of lived through it. On the right are some examples of questions that you might ask. That if you want to ask really direct, like, how are you going to support me in my identities, but that maybe it feels too direct. You can also ask, how do you promote a diverse and inclusive workplace? What are your company's commitments to diversity and inclusion as example questions? Just wanted to share the Resource Center. I talked about professional associations, and Jose mentioned like finding folks maybe through identity-based groups. So we do have some professional associations just on our site that are associated with identities here on the left tab. So if you're interested in getting connected with those in your field, this is one place that you could look. Okay, so what questions might we ask an employer during an interview or during an informational interview to find out about the work environment and culture? I'll just ask you folks again too, if you have any ideas, and if not, we can move on.
One that I love to ask is, how does your organization or department promote learning and growth? Because I think when we think of innovation, when we think of progress, when we think about equity, justice, and inclusion, it requires that you're current and constantly seeking out information. And so to me, that the way folks answer it can either show that it's something that they promote, they encourage, they provide funding for you to go to conferences or get books or whatever. And it can really show commitment, or you can see them fumble with this question, and it shows that they're kind of okay with being at the status quo and not wanting to grow and learn and challenge themselves. And so to me, that talks highly about like what that culture is and like if it's for me, because I'm always looking to grow and learn.
Yeah, I know I've asked this question in an interview before of, what are the, I think you said either commitments to or initiatives around diversity and inclusion, and just like blank stares. And it was like, oh, these folks haven't thought about this before. This was a surprising question. So that gives me a lot of information about, this is a question you didn't expect me to ask and not really prepared to answer it, versus here's some things we have that we're like, say we're going to do, versus here's like 4 programs that we're working on right now. Okay, last topic of the day, negotiating offers. This is one of my favorite ones. A colleague of mine, Jenny, and I just did a presentation on this for the Feminist Thought and Activism Conference. So if you want to learn more about like gender inequity in the workplace and negotiating offers, you can check that out as well. But negotiating offers, you got the offer, now what, right? They call you and they say, we thought you were great, we'd love to have you at our company. Our initial reaction might be to say, yes, absolutely, thank you so much. And we might want to pause a minute and think about, again, that we have a little bit of power in this situation. So last meme of the day, and this one says, why are you negotiating such a high salary when you have no experience in this field? And this random white dude says, well, the job is so much harder when you don't know what you're doing. So if this dude can use this argument, you can use a real argument. But I just thought this was kind of a ridiculous and funny graphic. So why is negotiating important? There's a lot of points here. And I think I want to make the point that it's important because there are lots of people who are already doing it, and we deserve to be compensated fairly for our work. And so that means on par with industry standards, on par with other folks who are doing similar types of work. Every time that we negotiate, we get more comfortable doing it. Like interviewing, it's uncomfy every time, and confidence builds through action. When we prove to ourselves that we can do something that was really uncomfy, we're more likely to do it again the next time. And in some spaces, your current salary can affect your next salary. So this is actually not legal in Colorado anymore to ask about your previous salary when offering a position, which is, I think, a very good law. In some places, they do offer new salaries based on what you were making previously. So if you make that first step of negotiating one offer, that could increase every subsequent offer that you get in the future, or even every subsequent raise, right, that you're getting in the future. It also shows that you have confidence, a skill set, you understand your value as an employee. This is a skill set, right? It's actually showing through the process that you have a skill set to be able to do influencing, make good arguments. And that's valuable to a lot of different careers. So you can show your skill set through the negotiation process. Many employers actually expect you to negotiate, and they may offer a number initially lower than what they're willing to. This is not true always. Some folks will say, like, there are some professions, and I think public education is one of them, where they might say this is just the offer. It is what it is. But in like the private industries, for example, it's more common to offer something lower than what they're willing because they are expecting you to negotiate. I did not know this at all. So I didn't talk about negotiation at all in college. I didn't even know it was an option. So when we don't even know that it's an option and yet it's expected, then we're not getting paid what we could be and should be. Here's some fun stats. People who negotiate their first salary can earn up to $500,000 more over the course of their entire career. And women who consistently negotiate can earn up to 1 million more over the course of their entire career. So it might seem at the time like, oh, it's just, maybe a couple $1,000s, or it's not a big deal, but over the course of your career, it adds up big time, especially if that's money that you can then set aside in like a retirement account or something. That money builds. So it might seem like a small amount, but over the course of your career, it can really, really add up. And lastly, it is generally a low risk, high reward activity. So it is very uncommon that if you ask the question, is the salary negotiable, an employer will revoke a job offer. The worst thing that they can say in that situation is no, it's not, I'm sorry. And then, right, you're in no worse position than you started in the first place. So there are kind of different levels of assertiveness in negotiating, but at that very basic level of, is this something that's negotiable? The worst thing that they can say is no, and they are extremely unlikely to revoke an offer because you ask. Okay, just want to point out a gender divide here. So men initiate salary negotiations about 4 times as often as women do, recognizing that this data is collected on a binary of gender. When women do negotiate, they also ask for about 30% less than men do. 2.5 times more women than men said they feel a great deal of apprehension about negotiating. So we could get into like some of the socialization, right, about not wanting to be rude and not wanting to feel pushy and some of those things. But there is a lot of apprehension, specifically with women around negotiating. And then women report salary expectations between 3 and 32% lower than those of men for the same jobs. And men expect to earn about 13% more and 32% more at their career peak. So we're kind of undervaluing ourselves, maybe, right, in what we're willing to ask for. And so it's important that we kind of know what other folks are making and are really articulating that worth so that we can start to close the wage gap. Right now, the wage gap between men and women is about 82, this is for all men and all women, is about 82 cents to $1. Okay, I would have us do this math activity, but this is because this is a little bit more lecture-y than interactive. So I'll just tell you the answers, but this is kind of fun. Even if you don't like math, I still think it's fun. So imagine your first job offer is $50,000. Let's say you stay with the company for 10 years, which to be fair is a little bit unrealistic because a lot of people don't stay with their first job for 10 years anymore. But if you negotiate, let's say just $3,000 on the original offer, how much more money will you make over the 10-year period? Jose and Deanna, you can actually guess. That could be fun. Well, you can say the answers too. So how much more over the 10-year period would you make if you negotiated $3,000, assuming that there's no like percentage-based raises? All right, y'all too slow. It's 30,000.
I wrote it in the chat. I wasn't sure.
Oh,
I was
you did?
really trying to do math in my head.
It's been a while, right, since we've been in math class. So 30,000 over the 10 years. Now let's say you're able to put away that extra 3,000 each year toward an investment or some type of retirement account. The investment averages, I'm a little bit nerdy about investing because I think it is one of the many things that like people who grow up with money know about and have access to, and people who don't have access to or don't know about, and that increases the wealth divide in America like incredibly. So I've spent a lot of time like just learning about it. So if you also want to talk with me about that, feel free. But let's say you put it so the average rate of return is about 10%. How much extra money will you have saved over the 10-year period if you're able to put that away in an investment because it's not necessarily something you're needing to spend like on rent and food? Take a guess. Don't overguess too, because then it will make the answer underwhelming.
Is it 3,000?
Wait, let's see. So it's 55,000. So instead, instead of just the 30,000, if you're able to invest it, it can turn into about 55,000 on average. And then if you don't touch that money until you retire, right? So if you put it in a retirement account, say for another 30 years, how much will that money have turned into overall by the time you retire? Jose, you gotta guess again because you're just on roll.
I was way off at 3,000. I'm gonna say $500,000. Why not?
You're very close, $635,000. So this is just to say that while we might come up with the argument of like, it's not that much money, it might not make a huge difference, it can over time. It really, really can. So that was my fun math activity for the day. Okay, so how do we actually do the negotiation, right? Maybe you're convinced, okay, this is something I want to try, it seems worth it. How do we actually do it? So as tempted as we are to on the phone be like, yes, absolutely, sign me up. I'll send my signature over right now. Take a second, don't accept or reject on the spot. express excitement and gratitude, say, I'm really excited to hear from you. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, but not agreeing to anything yet. Ask the employer for a reasonable amount of time to consider the offer. Most of them will be willing to give you at least 24 to 48 hours or maybe the weekend. And then check in with your support system and consider whether this is something that you want, right? Based on those questions in the interview, they want you, but do you want them? Is this something that's going to be sustainable? Is this a place that you feel like you really want to be? There are a lot of things to consider there. So consider whether you want it. And as an example, you could say something like, wow, thank you so much. I consider the job offer an honor. I'm excited about the opportunity to work for this company. In order for me to make the best possible decision, I need some time to consider. When would you need a decision by? And then as we're thinking about it, here are some things that we might consider. We might consider lifestyle things, workplace and environmental things, and then the salary and benefits package as a whole. I didn't understand anything about benefits before my first full-time role. It has been a journey to try to navigate. Sometimes I feel like it's intentionally confusing. And benefits are really important because it's not just salary that you're being offered. You're being offered time off, flexibility, ability to work remote, right? All that stuff is included. So in terms of possible benefits that you might see, lots of insurances, holidays and sick days, retirement plans, overtime expense reimbursement for moving costs, that kind of stuff. So all of that is worth considering. You might have two offers and one has a higher salary, but the other benefits are a lot better. And that salary could actually, or that job could actually be more valuable. Like that offer could be more valuable. Benefits typically add anywhere from 15 to 28% of someone's salary. So it's pretty significant what those benefits add. Okay, so if it's appropriate and if you're comfortable, which I would say it's always worth a shot, you can go through one of these approaches. They kind of vary in their level of assertiveness. The first is just, is it flexible at all? Or based on my level of experience and research, we'll talk about where you can do research. I was hoping for a salary closer to this range. Is there any possibility? And then the last example, which I really wouldn't do unless it's true, is that based on these things, I will need at least this amount to accept the position. I, again, would not say that unless it's true because they may revoke the offer in that situation if they're not able to meet that number. So highlight your years of experience, industry knowledge, specific accomplishments. This is where that confidence is so important, right? And us believing in our own value and worth, or how you will save the company, how you are actually a good investment for them. If you say, yeah, I'm asking for $2,000 more, $3,000 more, but I'm going to save you up to $15,000 every year based on my plan to do this or that. We're not always going to be in a position to do that if it's not like a sales position or something where we have a direct effect on money. But just as an example, if you are going into sales or finances, you can negotiate benefits too. So if they say salary is not flexible, you can say, can I maybe negotiate a few extra vacation days a year? Can I negotiate working from home a couple days a week? And then make sure you get the agreed upon salary and benefits just before you sign anything. So here's examples of places where you can really just search salary calculator online in a lot of places, but here are 3 examples of places you might go to find out what like the market averages are for certain careers. And I would always recommend double checking, not just going with one place and considering it's true. You want to check the reliability of this by looking at least 3 places and really as many as you can find. So just showing you what these look like. I just looked up that tech on these 3 just to show you what they look like. This is salary.com, Glassdoor, and PayScale. Okay, that is all the content I have. Jose and Deanna, do you all have any additions to the salary negotiation piece or just like content as a whole? I know that was a lot of stuff.
The only thing I would add, like these are all incredible, is like those additional benefits on top of the salary really do push things over, and you don't always think about them. Like insurance, like is your organization paying for your insurance or do you have to pay that monthly now? And so if your employer is paying your insurance, you could be saving up to $200 a month on insurance. And things like if they're providing like a move-in stipend, I've had previous experiences where they just gave me $3,000 to relocate, and I could use it for whatever I wanted. So I bought a couch. And so nothing too exciting, but it's those things you don't think about moving, or Yeah, and I really want to emphasize how you gave the example of asking for a time frame, not saying, "Can I get back to you in a day or two," but letting them say how long. Because I've used that example of like an open-ended, like, "When can I get back to you?" And they're like, "Oh, next week is totally fine." I was like, "Yes, I have a week to wait back until this other job gets back to me." And they might also connect you with people working. That's what they did. They said, "We will give you till next Friday. Would you like to talk to these XYZ employees to gain more insight about the role?" And that was super informative and helped me in my decision-making process. So other things, if it's not necessarily a high stakes salary role, that could help influence and make a decision a little bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see if I have anything else here. So just wanted to end with some Career Center resources, which you may or may not be familiar with already. But like I said, this is a lot of content in the job search process. Going through, like the first time I did all of it, it was really overwhelming and I needed a lot of support along the way. And so if you need support along the way too, that's totally fine. That's expected. It would be really hard to do all of this without support. So please lean on the Career Center or anyone that you feel like can be helpful, right? That's so we can be a support system, and friends and family can also be support as well. But just throughout the process, right? Whenever it makes sense to check in to do a mock interview, to say, I just got an offer, I don't know what to say. I need help talking through how to phrase this. You can always check in with the Career Center about that kind of stuff. So here's just a list of some of the things that we help students with that sometimes they don't always think about us for. For example, like graduate school, like understanding self-assessments, that kind of thing. A lot of people think about us as like the resume place, and that's true. We absolutely look at resumes, and there's a lot of other stuff that we can talk about too, including some of those like workers' rights stuff that we talked about today, or how to like learn more about employees and their inclusivity. So just come to us whenever it is helpful for you. And that's all I got. So thank you all. Good luck with the search. We're here for you, and we're rooting for you.
Oh, can you send a link for the Career Center?
Yeah, like the Career Center website.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, I'll also put my email in the chat if anyone wants to reach out to it.
Yeah, and for folks who are engaging with this here or with the recording, just make sure to do the post-evaluation for just AAC students. If you're from Community for Excellence only, don't worry about that, because that's in our website just for our students. And so for AAC students, just make sure to go to the designated program, either STEM Thrive-Grad or the Classic Thrive-Grad, for that post-evaluation to receive credit with the AAC. Are there any questions? Feeling good? Okay. Thank you, Madigan. Thank you, Jose, for being here. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure this recording is going to be really helpful for a lot of folks who were hoping to be here. But thank you so much. And thank you for providing these resources at the end.
Thank you. Have a good one.